Yes, so here on News Desk. Now, a coalition of civil society groups have joined forces to challenge government's plan to draw from the Oil and Gas Heritage Fund to finance its free senior high school policy. The civil society platform on oil and gas is asking government to immediately abandon its decision to, quote, raid the Oil and Gas Heritage Fund, end quote. In a statement, the group says the current arrangement will set aside only 9% of net petroleum revenues as a heritage for future generations is the result of intense negotiations and broad national consultations. It therefore considers it as an act in bad faith. I'm joined in the studio now by Dr. Steve Mantiao. He is a senior person at ISODEC. And good morning to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Right, thank you.
Great. So you've given just a few reasons I just read for why you think that you and other members in this coalition think that it is not a good idea for the government to use the Heritage Fund to sponsor the free senior high school policy. What other reasons do you think it will be bad for the government to use the fund to sponsor this program?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And let me begin by saying that there is a historical antecedent for the establishment of the Heritage Fund. And this is borne out to the fact that after mining gold for over 100 years, this country became a highly indebted poor country, which, to my mind, speaks volumes of how badly we managed gold revenue in this country. Indeed, we even went to the extent of selling our golden share in Anglo Gold Ashanti and used that money to finance recurrent expenditure, such that this country has nothing to show for 100 years of mining. I recall in 2007, when we discovered oil, the then MPP government, led by former President Kufuor, decided that we're not going to repeat the mistakes that we've made in the mining sector. And so in 2008, February, the government organized an Oil for Development conference at Gimpa to chart a new path for Ghana in terms of how we manage natural resource revenues. It is important to point out that at the core of this new path is to begin to treat our natural resource revenues not as income for consumption, but as income for investment. And so whatever we get, we'll put something aside against tomorrow. I happen to have chaired the governance session of that particular conference, so I very well remember the proceedings. And following that, in 2009, we went through a political transition, and the NDC government came into power. The lead consultant who began work on the Petroleum Revenue Management Act was not changed by the new government. He's in the person of Professor Joe Amahon Tufuor. He continued to see work on the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, which contains the arrangements with respect to how much we spend today and how much we save against the future. And he continued to work on this to see it to its conclusion. And a lot of discussions and negotiations went into this. In the end, Ghanaians agreed that we will save 9% of the total or net petroleum revenue. I say net because the PRMA, that's the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, requires that we assign up to 55% of total petroleum receipts to GNPC to finance its equity share in the Jubilee and also to undertake exploratory and other activities. And so once you've discounted the 55%, you then have what left converted into a whole. And then you assign 70% to the budget, what we call the annual budget funding amount. 21% is supposed to go into a fund called the Stabilization Fund, which is to help us manage the volatility effect of the petroleum prices on our budget. And then the 9% goes for future generation. And let me clarify here, reference to future generation is not to the children of today. the children of today have a share in the ABFA, that is 70% that is allocated for spending today.
And indeed, talking about future generation, if you check some of the dictionaries, for instance, website talks about 30 years difference.
What we were talking, I mean, if you look at the spirit of the law, we're referring to the generation that may not meet the Ghana's oil reserves. So when they come, by the time, for them, it will be history that once upon a time, this country was endowed with oil resources. They may not have met it, they will meet remnants of that oil wealth, which is the fund we bequeath to them.
Now, give us the breakdown in terms of how much it's going to cost us should Ghana go ahead to use this.
Let me make the point that as I speak with you, the amount accumulated in the Heritage Fund is below $300 million. This translates into about 1.2 billion cedis. The estimates that I've seen for financing the free SHS annually will be 3.6 billion Ghana cedis, which means the 1.2 billion Ghana cedis that is in the Heritage Fund is inadequate in financing the whole program. And this raises serious questions about sustainability. If I look at the current production levels and also the global crude prices, and I compute, I find that on an annual basis, we cannot expect, at least in the immediate or foreseeable future, to earn more than $20 million from the Heritage Fund. And therefore, it even compounds the issue about sustainability of the financing arrangement. I am not too sure if the government is intending to use the Heritage Fund as one of several other revenue streams. But if that's the case, I think the government needs to lay bare all the facts on the table so we can have a more meaningful engagement on the issue.
But as it stands now, the coalition says that do not touch the Heritage Fund. That's your posture.
Yes, I think that for something that has been arrived at through broad national consultations, which represents a certain national consensus, it will be an act in bad faith for any individual or persons to alter that without recourse to the people who agreed to have this kind of arrangement.
And indeed, when you check the Petroleum Revenue Management Act 2011, which was actually passed in 2011, it states that you can't review anything until after 15 years of implementation of the law, and we started implementing this in 2011. I want to quote section 20, which says that within 1 year after petroleum reserves are depleted, the monies held in both Ghana Stabilization Fund and Ghana Heritage Fund shall be consolidated into a single fund to be known as the Ghana Petroleum Wealth Fund, after which the Ghana Stabilization Fund and the Ghana Heritage Fund shall cease to exist. My interpretation of this is that we are supposed to use the money from the Heritage Fund after the depletion of this resource. So let's talk about the consequences of using this now. What will be the consequences?
Okay, right. I need to draw attention to the fact that the law allows us to use the interest accrued on the Heritage Fund 15 years after its establishment. And this can be done by 2/3 majority of parliamentary approval. Then, when in the unforeseeable future, the petroleum resources are depleted, the Heritage Fund, the Stabilization Fund will be merged to constitute the Ghana Petroleum Wealth Fund. You're right. But even at that point, the law does not permit us to spend the money. Once it is constituted into a Ghana Petroleum Wealth Fund, the fund is invested, and we shall continue to live on the dividends or the returns on that investment. This has been hailed all over the world as a best practice, and Ghana is acclaimed for taking such bold initiative. Let me make the point that it moves us away from the reckless practice of spending our principal, our capital, when other countries will treat their natural resource revenues as capital for investment and live off the returns on that investment. Norway has done it. Norway invests all its petroleum resources the revenues, and live off 4% of the returns on that investment. Back in Africa, a leading economy, Botswana, that's the same. They invest all the proceeds from their diamond operations into, they invest everything into various investment instruments and live off the returns on that investment. And I was in Botswana some time back, and the Minister for Mines at Botswana said they can account for every single dollar the country has earned from their diamond operations. The money is not spent, it's there, but it's working for them and giving them returns. In Ghana, we are threatening to even rate the little we have put away, the 9%, which is being invested. We want to rate it and spend it on recurrent expenditure item, education. And so when you have used it to cover the first year of expenditure and the money is gone, how do you sustain the investment in education?
Dr. Mattia, I just want to know, what is our fear? I understand the point you've made about how we manage the cocoa resources and the others, but what is our fear? Yesterday, I was having a conversation with a lawyer, and the conclusion was that, is it that we think that our country could collapse financially if we don't keep this thing? And I refer to the fact that, for instance, in the US, if they had not kept their national reserves in terms of money during the 2008 economic downturn, the system would have collapsed. Is it that kind of fear we are anticipating?
That is not the kind of fear we are anticipating. We are trying to avert the mind of government to the fact that there is a bigger pot of money somewhere that we can use to finance the free SHS. And that amount of money is from the same source. It's petroleum money. And it is as much as 70% of net returns on petroleum activities. 70%. So leave the 9% alone. I make the point that the 70% has been misused. For instance, in 2012, we took 2 million Ghana cedis of petroleum revenue, the part of the ABFA, and gave it to the Musicians Association of Ghana, Musica, in the name of capacity building. We have used the oil money recklessly, and I mean the 70%. Not too long ago, and I mean just last year. PIAC embarked on a fact-finding mission to the north and found that a lot of the projects supposed to be funded by oil money are not in existence. One was the Farikiya Islamic School in Tamale, where it benefited from a 6-unit classroom block. We went to site and found that there was no classroom block, even though the money had been disbursed as far back as 2014. There was also the Duri Dam in the Jarapa area, where monies have been allocated for the construction of the dam. We went to site, there was no construction work done, money gone. We can also talk about Nakori Dam in Wa Central area. Again, monies were disbursed for channeling works on the dam, the Nakori Dam. No channeling works had been done when we got there, but monies have gone. And I make the point that we have misused and abused the 70%. If you could not ensure the proper usage of 70%, don't go and touch the 9% that we have put aside for future generation. Maybe when they come to meet it, they will put it to better use. Our current generation is reckless.
You've spoken about the need for government to look away from this 9% and look at other sources. Apart from what you just mentioned, the 70%, which other sources do you think government can look at to fund this sustainably, this policy?
Right. I think I need to say that countries with weaker economies than Ghana have been able to undertake the same project. 10 years ago, Uganda, with a GDP of a mere $12 billion, began implementing free senior high school. In the year that Ghana has decided to introduce free senior high school, our GDP is $37 billion, 3 times the size of the Ugandan economy when they decided to go this path. So if Uganda was able to tax their 12 billion GDP to finance education, why can't Ghana tax its 37 billion GDP to finance SAVE? And this leads me to the point that there are too many leakages in our tax administration in this country. We sat down and looked on and lost a whopping 70 million US dollars in taxes that we could have collected in just 2 transactions. And I'm referring to the EO Group sale of its interest in Jubilee. Because of inconsistency between the provisions in the General Income Tax Law and the Petroleum Income Tax Law, they seized on that loophole and got away with the non-payment of capital gain tax on the profit they made from the sale of their stake in Jubilee. After that, we did nothing to close the loophole. We sat down, another year passed. Then Sabre Oil sold its interest in Jubilee and got away with the non-payment of capital gain tax. Between the 2 transactions, we lost $70 million. After we've lost it, the Minister for Finance then comes to Parliament and says, henceforth, the provisions of the General Income Tax Law shall apply to the petroleum sector. After we lost this money.
So you are certainly concerned about the loopholes in the system, the leakages, the need to stop them. But how do you intend to convince the government? And when I say you, I mean ASEP, ISODEC, as well as the other energy groups. How do you intend to convince government to do this? Because already senior minister and former finance minister Safo Mafo has stated that this is what government is going to do. And remember that previously, during the electioneering time before 2016, the politicians were also arguing about it as to whether or not we should use it. And then MPP was even against it. How do you intend to convince government to toe your line?
You see, when we vote governments into power, we have a responsibility to work with the government to find more sustainable solutions to our development challenges. And I guess that is why the current president in his inaugural address said that he wants us to be active citizens and not spectators. And so we are doing just what he expects of us. As to whether he will listen or not, it's a different matter.
Is there going to be a petition of a sort?
Well, I think we put the issue out. In fact, the paper that we issued yesterday is very comprehensive. It shows our support for the program. It highlights our concerns. It offers solutions in terms of how we can get out of the difficult situations we find ourselves. I mean, that is what active, responsible citizens have to do. But I don't think the government needs controversy in the early days of its reign. What it needs is a certain goodwill of a people. You need to carry people with you when you are governing, so that decisions that you take will be collectively owned, so that another government does not come to reverse what you have done. We don't want to play politics with our future.
Doc, what will this coalition do if the current government fails to listen to your concerns?
We've been around for some time, and I think the various political parties know what we can do. It is not just by chance that the NDC lost the elections. It was a certain concerted campaign against the government's failure to check corruption, and how this government hemorrhaged in a way that brought a lot of hardships onto Ghanaians. And so I think the current government will take note and advise itself accordingly.
Your final words, Dr. Mantiao.
My final word is that the free SHS is a good thing, but financing needs to be thought through properly. And we need to ensure that we don't get into it and then somewhere along the line run into challenges and stall the whole program.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Steve Mantiao is a senior member with ISODEC, and he's been sharing his thoughts as well as some work the group has done into the need for government not to go into the Heritage Fund and use it to sponsor the free senior high school education, the high school policy. You're still here on News Desk on Journey. Stay with us. We'll be back very shortly.